The Second Punic War was one among 3 wars fought between Carthage and the Roman Republic. Today we are going to explain one battle in the Second Punic War called the Battle of Cannae. It took place in Cannae, Italy on the 2nd of August 216 BC, between Rome and Carthage. The Battle of Cannae was a devastating blow to the Romans, with almost all of their army defeated. Although they had a much larger army, Hannibal managed to defeat them with powerful tactical strategies. The Carthaginian army was led by Hannibal. He was the son of Hamilcar Barca, who led Carthage during the First Punic War. The Roman army was led by the consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. They were appointed consuls, the executive leaders of Rome, in the elections of 216 BC. Because they each led 4 legions of soldiers, when the 2 armies combined to 8 legions, Roman law required each of them to lead the entirety of the army every other day. Varro wanted an all-out battle after an earlier skirmish with Hannibal, leading to his possible overconfidence. Paulus was more conservative towards using the Fabian tactic. The Fabian tactic is when one army tries to wear down the other with small skirmishes instead of facing them straight on. The Roman side was made up of 8 legions and their allies from Italian city-states. The 8 legions added up to about 40,000 soldiers, with 2,400 cavalry. 40,000 soldiers were brought in by their allies, along with 4,000 cavalry. This added up to a total of 86,400 soldiers. The Carthaginian army was joined by African, Spanish, and Gallic troops, as well as Gaetulians, Libyans, Numidians, and Iberians. The total of the army consisted of 32,000 heavy infantry, 8,000 light infantry, and 10,000 cavalry. The heavy infantry was made up of 8,000 Libyans, 8,000 Iberians, 16,000 Gauls, and 5,500 Gaetulians. The light infantry was made up of Balearic slingers and spearmen of different countries. The cavalry was made up of 4,000 Numidian, 2,000 Iberian, 4,000 Gallic, and 450 Libyan Phoenicians. The difference between the heavy and light infantry is that the heavy infantry was more experienced. However, like with most ancient battles, the sources that gave these numbers may not be correct, and there are different sources that state different numbers. It is certain, however, that the Roman army was larger than that of the Carthaginians.
Hannibal used the terrain, positioning his army so that the Romans faced east. The sun would shine in the Romans' faces, and southeasterly winds would blow sand and dust into their faces. Instead of the more popular way of positioning armies, with the infantry in the center and cavalry on the sides, called wings, he used an encircling method. As the Roman army approached, his wings marched around the infantry and enclosed it.
Hannibal hid his moves by placing his light infantry in front of his heavy infantry. The heavy infantry was shaped in a crescent. His cavalry was on the sides of the main army. Then he ordered his light infantry to fall back so that the heavy infantry was facing the Romans. The Romans acted as usual. Their light infantry was positioned at the front to cover the position of their army. On the right wing was the Roman cavalry, and the allied cavalry was on the left wing.
The Romans used a way to organize their army called the phalanx. The phalanx could be a powerful tactical strategy if used correctly. In it, soldiers held round shields to protect themselves, keeping a very tight line. They threw spears in between the gaps of the shields and men. The soldiers would be densely packed to let the rows behind them physically push the enemies backwards. Unfortunately, because of the strong forward push, it was difficult to turn around.
The Romans advanced, using their superior infantry to best advantage. They had their light infantry fall back and advance towards their enemy with their heavy infantry. The crescent of Hannibal's heavy infantry buckled, so that the crescent faced the opposite direction. To the Romans, this seemed to be because of their powerful advance. The truth was that the troops had been told to retreat. The Carthaginian light troops who had pulled back at the beginning had now taken position behind the crescent as well as to each side of it. At the same time as the advance of their infantry, the Roman cavalry on the right wing now engaged the heavy cavalry on the left of the Carthaginians.
As the Romans pushed forward, they believed that they were winning. Despite what they thought, Hannibal still had a trick up his sleeve. His light infantry was creeping around the sides of the Romans. The Roman cavalry was being pushed back by the Carthaginian cavalry, leaving the sides wide open. When the Roman cavalry was defeated, the Carthaginian cavalry surrounded the Roman infantry and defeated their cornered army. The casualties, similar to the numbers, are heavily debated. However, it is not debated that a majority of the Roman army was decimated, although losses occurred on both sides. The Romans and their allies lost somewhere around from 50,000 to 75,000 infantry and about 2,700 cavalry. 10,000 of their soldiers were captured. Paulus was also a casualty, which left Varro as a surviving consul. He was blamed for much of the loss, although it was possible that not all of it was true. He did not have powerful descendants, which Paulus had, to keep his name free of blame. The Carthaginians lost 5,700 soldiers, although another source states 8,000. 2,000 cavalry were killed, along with 4,000 Gauls and 1,500 Spanish and African infantry. Fortunately, Scipio Africanus would soon come to their rescue. For the Carthaginians and their allies, they would eventually be stopped, but not before heavy losses on both sides. This is a powerful example of how being a strong leader can make a huge difference. Although the Romans had a big number advantage, Hannibal still managed to defeat them by planning ahead and thinking outside the box.